Hello, everyone. My name is Javi Rodriguez, and this is my open source contribution. I decided to contribute to the Godot engine. It's a free open source game engine for the development of 2D and 3D games. It's cross-platform, supports C, C++, C Sharp, and its own programming language called GDScript. It was publicly released in 2014 under the MIT license. It's one of the most popular repositories on GitHub, has over 85,000 stars, 19,000 forks, 65,000 commits, and over 2,500 contributors. The code base is primarily written in C++, but it also includes C Sharp, C, Java, and Python code. The issue I decided to tackle is issue number 93439, flow container scale also scales wrap breakpoint. So as you can see here, this object is called a flow container. It's a UI object, and basically it aligns and keeps its children contained within its boundaries. So if its children ever exceed its boundaries, it's supposed to wrap around to a new line. But as you can see, it's affected by the scale. So here the scale is 1, everything works fine. But if you shorten the scale to 0.5, for some reason, its children start to wrap around the midpoint. And this is obviously a bug. So the first problem I ran into when trying to fix this issue is compiling the source code. It turns out compiling the source code took a lot longer than I expected. I expected it to take at most an hour. It probably took me around 3. I kept getting this error about Molten BK SDK, and it has to deal with Vulkan SDK. It turns out Godot relies on Vulkan SDK on macOS, and Vulkan SDK is not included in macOS. So I did a bunch of Googling. I couldn't find any answers. I installed Vulkan SDK, but I couldn't. This Vulkan SDK path wasn't working. But it turns out I did some looking, and in the Godot repository, there's a script called install Vulkan SDK macOS. And if you run that script, everything works fine. But that was not included in the documentation for compiling on macOS. Still, after resolving that error, it still took 20 minutes for the build to compile. Second problem was actually fixing the bug. It turns out debugging in a large complex code base is hard. There's functions that call other functions that are defined in completely different files. And while I had no trouble finding where the bug should be, I couldn't figure out what exactly needed to be changed. So right away, I knew I was dealing with a flow container, so I figured the bug would be in flowcontainer.cpp. And right away, I noticed this function called resort, which I figured had to do something with sorting the children objects. And that is correct, as you can see by this code that's in resort. And I knew that since our issue was that it's wrapping around the midpoint, I figured it had something to do with this variable current container size. Because as you can see down here, there's a check that checks when a new child should be wrapped to a new line, and it includes the current container size. And it turns out I was right. Current container size was incorrect. That function that is called within current container size getRect actually gets the size of the container by multiplying its true size by the scale factor, but we don't want to factor in the scale. So all you have to do is change getRect to get size, and the flow container now ignores scale when it wraps lines. So as you can see here, scale is 1, works fine. Scale is 0.5, it doesn't wrap around at the midpoint anymore, works fine. And just to make sure, we shorten the size of the flow container and scale it, and it still works fine. It doesn't wrap around until the children exceed the boundaries of the flow container. This fix took approximately 8 hours, and all I did was change one line, getRect.size to get size. And you can see that change at github.com/JaviRodriguez/Godot. What I learned from this is that compiling source code might take longer than expected. I should learn to use a debugger. Turns out Prit debugging is not time efficient. I kept using it to find the actual value of current container size and modifying the value, seeing what changed. And it turns out that's not a really efficient way to do things. And I should also learn to better communicate in the issue thread. I had an idea of where the bug might be in right away, but I couldn't figure out exactly what to change, and someone in the thread probably could have helped me find what I had to do faster. Thank you.